Did you know that a Pokémon narrator was arrested for possession and abuse of illegal substances, and that due to this, a Pokémon short was banned in Japan? A popular franchise like Pokémon is bound to be targeted by certain groups, or even Pokémon fans themselves. In this video, we'll talk about controversy and criticism toward the Pokémon franchise as a whole. Welcome to the Pokémon Controversy and Criticism Iceberg.
Say my name, Eisenberg. You're goddamn right.
Banned episodes. The best-known controversy of them all is the Electric Soldier Porygon episode. 685 children were sent to the hospital due to nausea, dizziness, loss of consciousness and seizures. The episode was included in the 2004 edition and the 2008 Gamers edition of the Guinness World Records book, holding the record for most photosensitive epileptic seizures caused by a television show. It has been referenced several times in popular TV shows such as The Simpsons and South Park. Porygon itself became a controversial Pokémon, although in reality, the lights that caused children to be sent to the hospital were produced by Pikachu. The Legend of Dratini is another controversial episode that was banned in almost all countries outside of Japan, mainly due to the excessive use of firearms, pointed and fired against various characters. And what an episode to be banned, because this was an important one to understand how Ash caught a total of 30 Tauros. Another contributor to the banning of this episode was Meowth using a mustache in the fashion of Adolf Hitler. Another early episode banned in the West was Beauty and the Beach. It was banned due to James participating in a beauty contest who, in order to gain an advantage, resorted to use an inflatable suit to give him big breasts. Another inappropriate moment is when an old man stares at Misty's breasts and mentions that he's looking forward to having fun with her in a couple of years. The Japanese narrator of the 7 Pikachu short, Sakai Noriko, was arrested in 2009 and later convicted of possession and abuse of drugs. Because of this, the short was banned in Japan, and it hasn't been rerun or released on home video in Japan since then. There are many banned episodes that you can check on Bulbapedia if you're interested. Animal cruelty. Organizations like PETA have stated that the way Pokémon battles take place is analogous to cockfighting in that two animals fight against their will for dominance or survival, while the owner receives a prize or money for victory. In this type of competition, the animal is subject to injuries or death. However, Pokémon has been compared more to rhinoceros beetle fights, in which set confrontations are harmless or non-lethal to the insects. In fact, it is said that Satoshi Tajiri's inspiration for Pokémon is based on that bug competition. Moreover, while Pokémon can sustain damage, there hasn't been a single instance in which a Pokémon dies directly from injuries in a fight. Also, Pokémon are seen to enjoy battles and take pride in their performance and victory. Kadabra. Several decades ago, if you said spoon and telekinesis, you wouldn't think about Kadabra, but about Uri Geller, who was a popular magician and illusionist who claimed to have telekinetic powers. He became popular for supposedly being able to bend spoons with his mind. When the Pokémon Kadabra was released, Uri Geller took notice of the similarities and decided that Nintendo infringed copyright. Geller's first words on the matter were that Nintendo turned him into an evil, occult Pokémon character, and that Nintendo had stolen his likeness by using his name and his signature image. Although Kadabra and Uri Geller's name are completely different, it's the Pokémon's Japanese name that Geller referred to, as Kadabra in Japan is known as Yun Getter. Not a perfect match, but I can see a resemblance. This wouldn't be the first time that Pokémon are named after famous people like Jackie Chan and Bruce Lee, in the case of Hitmonchan and Hitmonlee respectively. 20 years later after Geller's complaint, he apologized for the dispute, stating, "I'm truly sorry for what I did 20 years ago. Kids and grown-ups, I am releasing the ban. It's now all up to Nintendo to bring my Kadabra Pokémon card back. It will probably be one of the rarest cards now. Much energy and love to all."
Make a long story short, I became a grandfather. I released Nintendo from the lawsuit. And guess what? The card is coming back. Read my message. This is great news. Hey, kids, you got Geller back. Love you all.
Hypno. It carries a pendulum-like device. There once was an incident in which it took away a child it hypnotized. This is the LeafGreen description of one of the original 151 Pokémon, Hypno. The popular Sleeper 097 t-shirt depicts a Hypno walking hand in hand with two children, apparently hypnotized by his pendulum, and taking them somewhere without their consent. Even in the anime, Hypno and Drowsy are seen using their hypnotic powers to specifically target children. Religion. Pokemon being satanic became a popular idea among religious fundamentalists. Preachers like Josue Irion would talk about the evil properties of Pokemon as well as butchering their names every single time.
Warsolt, Brystol, Caterpillar, Whitley, Rastala, Evans, Nicoden, Nicodiro, Clerefal, Islombro, Hausler, el dios del engaño y de la mentira, del hipnotismo.
This has always been the case with movies, cartoons, books or anime in which magic spells or supernatural events happen, and Pokemon, given its popularity, was the center of attention of these religious groups. Nowadays, an Italy-based broadcasting network that carries Roman Catholic-themed programming broadcast public approval of Pokemon in April 2000, stating that the games did not have any harmful moral side effects and was based on ties of intense friendship. Racism. The Steel member of the Reggie trio was part of a controversy linked to his Diamond and Pearl sprite, as evidenced by this animation in which it has a striking resemblance to a salute performed by members of the National Socialist Party. Due to the controversy, the sprite was later changed. Jinx's design was officially revised by Game Freak to be purple rather than black, starting with the international releases of Pokemon Gold and Silver and being included in all versions of the game from Generation 3 onward. In recent years, some fans of Pokemon have noted that Jinx may be inspired by Ganguro, a Japanese fashion where women tan heavily, bleach their hair, and apply large amounts of makeup instead of a black stereotype. This theory is mainly based on Jinx's long straight blonde hair, a common attribute of Ganguro fashion. The gym leader of Nacrene City in Pokemon Black and White, Lenora, also brought up concerns of racism. Lenora's original artwork, as well as her in-game sprites, depict her wearing a large apron. Concerns arose that people outside of Japan would allude Lenora to the Mami stereotype. Similar to Lenora, the Mami is often depicted as a dark-skinned woman who wears a handkerchief on her head and an apron. Because of the similarity, Lenora's artwork was changed from her wearing the apron to her having it slung over her shoulder like a cape. Despite this, Lenora's in-game sprites were not altered in the international releases of Pokemon Black and White or Pokemon Black 2 and White 2. Glitches. Glitches are everywhere in video games, and they're a natural result of programming, as not everything can be perfect. However, when it comes to glitches, I haven't seen as many as the ones found in the first generation of Pokemon games, which happens to be a glitch generator in itself. The Mew glitch, Glitch City, Pokemon over level 100 and many more are examples of these programming errors and oversights that, although could be criticized from a programming point of view, happen to be extremely fun to experiment with. Third versions. Pokemon paired versions are basically the same game, with minor differences in earlier games such as the Pokemon you're able to catch. Nonetheless, this has never been a problem, as the games in question are released at the same time, so consumers have the choice to pick whatever versions appeal the most to them. But when the third version of those games is released, it's sometimes met with criticism for not adding enough content to make it worth buying. Some people used to just wait for the third version to come out, in order not to spend money on the initial pair of games, or stick to the ones they bought at the beginning. I think this practice stopped with Platinum, or maybe Black and White too, as from Pokemon X and Y onward, this practice stopped and we didn't get the chance to play Pokemon Z or Stars. Gambling. The Game Corner was an iconic place in several Pokemon regions that acted as a casino where the player would be able to buy or earn coins to exchange for different prizes. Due to this, as well as the nature of Pokemon battles in which the player earns money for defeating the opposing trainer's Pokemon, the franchise has been accused of gambling, under the assumption that such confrontations have been compared to cockfighting by some groups. This had an impact on the way the games were classified to audiences, as in order to make these games E for everyone, they had to stop referencing simulated gambling in games. Porygon did nothing wrong. This refers to a tweet posted by the Pokemon Company saying, "Porygon did nothing wrong." This is a clear reference to the episode that caused many children in Japan to be hospitalized due to seizures. It's interesting to notice that indeed, Porygon did nothing wrong, as Pikachu was responsible for the lights that affected the Japanese children watching the show. But as the face of Pokemon, it wouldn't have been easy to get rid of Pikachu, so Porygon took the blame. Although the Pokemon Company was right, the general public took the tweet as disrespectful toward the children and their families affected by seizures and other symptoms. Pokemon Go. Pokemon Go has caused several accidents. This is due to the nature of the game, as it encourages exploration to catch Pokemon. Several of these occurrences have been reported in the news, such as the case of Gerson Lopez de Leon, who was believed to be the first person to die as a result of playing Pokemon Go. He died of a gunshot wound after he and his cousin broke into a house in Chiquimula in a bid to catch Pokemon. Another case is that of a Danish man who was killed in a traffic accident near Aarhus, with police noting the app was still running on his phone by the time they arrived at the scene. Another controversy emerged with a picture of a coffin being present in the Holocaust Memorial Museum. As Pokemon fans know, Koffing is the gas Pokemon, so it was expected that people thought it was insensitive that a creature of this nature would show up in a place like this. This was obviously an unintentional occurrence, as Koffing is a quite common Pokemon found almost anywhere in the world. Suffocation with toys. In January 1999, a 7-year-old boy suffocated to death after a Pokemon Power Bouncer Ball got stuck in his throat while playing with it. After his death, his parents created a website named Pokemon Kills, criticizing Hasbro and Pokemon for not taking appropriate safety measures in their product design. In November 1999, the boy's parents filed a lawsuit against Hasbro and Toys R Us. In December 1999, as a promotion for Mewtwo Strikes Back, Burger King released a series of promotional toys in handheld Pokeballs with their kids' meals. After a child suffocated because she had covered her mouth and nose with half of the Pokeball, Burger King recalled the Pokeballs and exchanged them for food for a limited amount of time. Censorship in TCG. Early Japanese Pokemon cards generated concern about being inappropriate for the Western public. Take a look at Koga's Ninja Trick. We can see a symbol that Western audiences could mistake for an infamous one related to mass murder and hate. In spite of it being a symbol of divinity in its origin, it had to be modified for Western audiences. The same happened with Misty's Tears, given that it shows the water gym leader without clothes in the Japanese version. Sabrina's Gaze is another case, in which the psychic gym leader might seem as if she were giving the players the finger. Broken mechanics in early generations. The fact that the special stat accounted for both special attack and special defense in Generation 1 games gave an unfair advantage to many Pokemon, especially psychic types. Attacks such as Fire Spin and Wrap disabled the opponent from using any moves at all, and being frozen virtually meant losing a battle. This, among a bunch of other oversights and unbalanced elements, were enough reasons to say that Generation 1 mechanics were broken. Chimpokomon. The episode parodies Pokemon and fat culture in general. The line of toys has additionally made cameos in many subsequent episodes. Near the end of the episode, Kenny dies of an epileptic seizure as a reference to the banned episode Electric Soldier Porygon. The episode additionally heavily parodies the anime and video games to a lesser extent. Some of the chimp Pokémon seen closely resemble Pikachu, Meowth, Jolteon and Charmander. Pokémon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl. When it comes to remakes, FireRed and LeafGreen got us accustomed not only to graphical improvement, but also to extra content. FireRed and LeafGreen had the Sevi Islands, and Pokémon from Generation 2. Heart Gold and Soul Silver got the Pokewalker, the inclusion of Gen 1 and Gen 3 legendary Pokémon, as well as the national dex at the time, with 493 Pokémon to catch, and many more features that probably make it the best remake ever released. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire have the Delta episode, new Mega Evolutions, and the National Dex with 721 Pokémon. Although Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl are graphically superior as expected, the games were blamed for being extremely faithful, to the extent of not taking into account the chance to include the story of Platinum in the way that Heart Gold and Soul Silver did with Pokémon Crystal. Something else is the scaling of Pokémon that follow the player. The scaling looks odd in comparison to what was seen in Heart Gold and Soul Silver or Pokémon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee. The difficulty in Pokémon games has been considered to be very easy, but when it comes to the Elite Four in the Sinnoh remakes, it's on another level, as the Elite Four will have Pokémon with 30 IVs. In addition, Cynthia has a balanced team of 31 IV Pokémon against your regular adventure team. Without a doubt, one of the most criticized remakes. Gear Project. Gear Project, or Team Number 1, is the name given to a team at Game Freak exclusively dedicated to producing non-Pokémon games, while Team Number 2 is dedicated to Pokémon. The decision of Game Freak to have a group of people not dedicated to the Pokémon franchise has been the reason why some think that the most recent Pokémon games are not meeting the expected quality standards, and that it makes no sense to put effort into projects that won't stand out. Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire Battle Resort. According to Junichi Masuda, they didn't include the Battle Frontier in Pokémon Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, because only a very small part of the players would have fully appreciated it and made use of the feature. Nowadays, players get bored and frustrated more easily, and they aren't interested in things that are so demanding or challenging. The Battle Frontier is a set of post-game competitive facilities introduced in Pokémon Emerald, where the player is tested in different ways, and it's considered one of the hardest challenges in Pokémon, and one of the most iconic features of the third generation of Pokémon games. The exclusion of this place in the 3DS remakes disappointed a lot of people who were expecting to relive the experience in their new consoles. Bad animation. One of the main exposers of this criticism is the YouTuber Distant Kingdom, whose some of his videos are focused on bad animation and bad decisions made by Game Freak in recent games. He points out at the fact that past games such as Pokémon Stadium or Pokémon Battle Revolution have better animations than, for example, Sword and Shield. He exemplifies this by showing a video where a Pokémon uses double kick in a 7th generation game and compares it to Pokémon Battle Revolution, in which we can see a more fluent and action-oriented animation. Some say that due to the amount of existing Pokémon and moves, giving each Pokémon and move a distinct and complex animation would take up a lot of data, while others state that Game Freak hasn't been putting the necessary effort and love into their intellectual property. Cut Pokémon in Pokémon Ruby and Sapphire. Countless hours and effort go into collecting and training Pokémon, and this was the case for players who spent years playing Gen 1 and 2, only to realize that their beloved Pokémon would be trapped due to the lack of compatibility between Gen 3 with the previous generations. This wouldn't have been a big of a deal if it weren't for the fact that 184 Pokémon were nowhere to be found in the Hoenn region. It wouldn't be until the release of Pokémon FireRed and LeafGreen, as well as Colosseum and Gale of Darkness, that players were able to catch them all. Specifically for this, the Gen 3 Pokédex is known to be one of the hardest ones to complete. Onyx and Cloyster Battle. Many have pointed out that a couple in Pokémon Heart Gold and Soul Silver reference male and female private parts based on the Pokémon they used against the player, Onyx and Cloyster. If it's a coincidence or included intentionally by the developers, it's anyone's guess. Rarity in shiny Pokémon. 1 in 8,192 was the chance of finding a shiny Pokémon in the first generations of Pokémon games. This made this elusive Pokémon as rare as even mythical Pokémon back in the day. Due to their rarity, not too many people even knew about their existence, and the ones that did, didn't come across many of these creatures as people nowadays. Features such as the shiny charm, the Masuda method, among other more recent elements, made encountering shinies or even shiny hunting way easier, and to some degree, these rare Pokémon lost their value as generations went by. On top of that, hacking became an easier and more accessible method to obtain the rarest Pokémon, given that you can even buy these illegal Pokémon online, and given that making them look legit is not as difficult as it might sound, many people can brag about having hundreds of shiny Pokémon, and it would be impossible to prove them otherwise. Pokémon is an easy game. Pokémon games have never been known for their high difficulty. Even going back to Gold, Silver and Crystal, it's quite easy to finish the game due to the most powerful trainers in the region having Pokémon below level 50. Nowadays, with the experience share item, whether a Pokémon enters the battlefield or not, it will gain experience from battles, making the games easier and the trainer's party more balanced. To my knowledge, only Black and White 2 introduced different difficulties, including challenge mode. However, there was an oversight in which a Pokémon, for example, would show up with a higher level, but with the stats of a lower level one. Even so, the adventure was more difficult and the trainer would have extra Pokémon with increased artificial intelligence and more competitive held items. People have proposed to give players the freedom to adjust the difficulty of the games at the beginning of the adventure to appeal to all kinds of trainers, but for one reason or another, Game Freak hasn't shown any interest. Pronouns disqualification. During a Pokémon tournament, when being asked about his pronouns, the contestant Makani Tran laughed, causing the discomfort of a judge and his subsequent disqualification. This caused outrage, as some people thought the participant was laughing at the question. According to him, he was laughing out of nervousness, but this explanation didn't change anything in the end. Violence in the Pokémon manga. The Pokémon anime, except for certain early episodes, is very light-hearted. However, when it comes to the manga, it can get quite violent compared to what Pokémon have us accustomed to. Take for example this scene, in which an Arbok is split in half by a Charmeleon. We can see this Cobra Pokémon lying dead on the floor, with its innards splattered all over the floor. Another instance is a zombified Psyduck, shown lacking an eye and in a decomposing state. Hacking in competitive Pokémon. Hacked Pokémon are Pokémon that are not obtained by normal means in-game, usually created by using non-official and not supported third-party software to bypass all the process of obtaining that Pokémon. When it comes to players cheating on their own games without any interaction with other players, probably nobody would care. But if a player decides to cheat using these tools to achieve something as big as winning a championship, it's different. To my knowledge, the problem with artificially creating Pokémon is that, if done well, it could almost be impossible to detect if a Pokémon was hacked or not. There could be a scenario in which a hacked Pokémon that had a beneficial event exclusive move could make it into an important competition without being detected as hacked because its information wouldn't display any inconsistency. I don't know anything about how legitimacy is checked in Pokémon tournaments, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it might be impossible to always be sure if a Pokemon is legit or not, as far as elements such as the Pokeballs where a Pokemon can be caught or its moves are possible in the games. This would naturally discourage players from putting the effort in investing hundreds of hours in building competitive teams, and maybe at some point make the decision of hacking Pokemon themselves. Some people have proposed that players in tournaments should be able to generate Pokemon under the supervision of the tournament staff, with all the characteristics they wanted, as long as they're allowed to use those Pokemon and end the debate, but it might discourage them from playing the Pokemon games to begin with. Shiny hunting.
I saw the SPS, saw it was, oh my god, shiny Natu! Shiny Natu! Oh my god! Oh my god! Shiny Natu! Oh my god!
Shiny Pokemon are rare, and passionate Pokemon players are focused on catching the rarest Pokemon to ever exist, rather than on other aspects of the game. While encountering a shiny can be exciting, some players think that the act of soft resetting for hours or even days might be boring and a waste of time. Some people have criticized the amount of time it takes to hunt for a shiny Pokemon, especially in older games, where the odds were 1 in 8,192. A shiny Ralts hunt on YouTube, for example, took 247,289 soft resets, showing how much effort, dedication and time can take to get a Pokemon with a different coloration. Nidoqueen pose in Japanese Pokemon Stadium. Nidoqueen's animation in the Japanese Pokemon Stadium 1 proudly holds her chest after being sent out from her Pokeball. This was toned down for the Western audience in the American Pokemon Stadium, but not that much for some. Mystery gift lack of accomplishment. Getting a rare Pokemon, especially a mythical one, was uncommon. If one of them was available, it would be given away at specific locations and for an unlimited amount of time, therefore reserved for only a few. Nowadays, with access to the internet and codes, any player almost anywhere around the world can have access to this rare Pokemon. Even when Game Freak distributed mythical Pokemon, it wasn't directly in the form of the Pokemon itself, but tickets or items that would give the player access to locations in which they could catch these Pokemon on their own. Lugia was created under the influence of drugs. Takeshi Shudo was heavily involved in the production of the anime and was responsible for the creation of one of the most iconic Pokemon from the second generation, Lugia. What's controversial about this fact is that, as the entry states, he created this legendary Pokemon under the influence of several substances, as he said in an interview. If I can't drink, I take tranquilizers. When I get a little bit high, it helps me sort out all my confused thoughts. However, when it comes to alcohol and drugs, you need to know your limit. If I start to think that 1 + 1 doesn't necessarily equals 2, when this becomes difficult, it means I'm drunk. If I get any more intoxicated after that, I won't be able to think productively. And there's also the danger of tripping somewhere and hurting myself. Ghetsis. The amount of catchable Pokemon by the time of Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon was up to 807. This was the last time we saw the national dex in a game, as with the release of Sword and Shield and subsequent games, the national dex is yet to make an appearance. The reason behind this controversial decision was due to the sheer amount of Pokemon that exist nowadays, with a total of 1017. This was naturally poorly received by Pokemon fans, as many of their favorite Pokemon wouldn't make it into the final cut. Game Freak tried to choose the most popular Pokemon in order to satisfy most players, but this never really worked, and it's possible that with upcoming generations this will keep happening indefinitely. 4 Fingers. For those who watched my Iceberg about Pokemon Red, Blue and Yellow, you might remember a controversy going on about the fact that Mr. Mime had 4 fingers in its initial artwork. For those who aren't familiar with Japanese culture, 4 fingers is often synonym for being part of the Yakuza, that is, the Japanese mafia, as, in order to atone for a misdeed by their members, they need to perform a ritual known as Yubitsume, where a member will cut off their pinky finger. From Generation 2 onward, Mr. Mime is seen with 5-finger hands. Poo fight. After 30-40 minutes in my room, relaxing with a quick snooze, I awoke to the sound of banging coming from down the hall from where the Spanish team were staying in. It seems that at some point after they had turned up and when we went to Weatherspoons, the Spaniards had decided to have a poo fight in the corridor, and this had upset the staff and several guests at the hotel enough to call the police and have them leave. This was reported by an entrant of the Pokemon video game championship in Birmingham, known as PokeChamp21, who had the misfortune of witnessing what Team Spain was doing in the corridors of his hotel under the influence of alcohol. Thank you so much for the good reception. I would love those of you who are returning viewers to subscribe to my channel. It would help me continue growing and bringing you the best content possible. I wish you a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next one.